Hey, and welcome to Kensington Church. My name is Greg, and we are excited that you are here with us today. We have a great service planned for you. We have Brian and Carrie and Megan who are going to be leading us in some music, and we also have our lead pastor, Patrick Holden, who will be delivering the message in the first of a series we're calling Crave. Hey, and we do want to say thanks to all of you who share our content online. You really are an integral part of sharing this message of hope, not only in this city of Traverse City, but also around the world. So thanks for checking out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages, and thanks for liking and sharing. Well, with all that said, we are just about to get started. So thanks again for being a part. Hey, well, welcome Kensington Church. How are you guys doing today? Yeah, good. Yeah, for the few that are braving these icy roads, I know it's just a northern Michigan thing, right? This is just part of life up here. We take the beauty and the slippery roads all together. Well, my name is Greg, and I have the pleasure of being on staff here at Kensington Church, and we are so glad that you are with us today. And if it is your first time with us, a special welcome, and we want to just let you know that this is a safe place to explore your faith. And hey, if it is your first time too, we wanted to make sure that if you're looking for more connection here or to want to find out more about us, we'd love for you to pull out your phones, because today we're starting something that we're calling Starting Point Today. You can actually go to Starting Point Today on your phone, and you can fill out a quick form just to get that conversation started. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be sure to get back with you. Well, just another note about today's service. This actually has a PG-12 rating, and it has a PG-12 rating just because of one of the video elements that we're sharing later in the day has some more mature content that's being shared. So if you're a parent and you've got a teenager or an elementary school student and you don't want them to be in the service, we have a great environment for them. So if you head out the doors, and you'll be directed where you need to go. Well, I'd love for you too, as we get rolling, to pull out the card that you saw next to you or on your seat when you came in. Now, this is something really cool that we're doing next month, February 10th through the 17th, where we're partnering with an organization called Safe Harbor. So if you've been around Kensington for very long, you know about Safe Harbor, but if Safe Harbor is new to you, it's actually a completely volunteer-run shelter in Traverse City. And something very cool is that we have a brand new facility, Safe Harbor does, that we can do this in. And so it says 90 of your neighbors won't risk their lives sleeping outside this winter because of you. Now, this is a reality. It's a little bit shocking, and it's something that I don't really think about day to day, because I'm blessed to have a house that I can make sure that I'm warm and covered and safe from the elements of the winter. But there are so many of our neighbors in Traverse City that do not have safe shelter, and that's what Safe Harbor provides for them. So what we're asking of you is that we need you to sign up to take part February 10th through the 17th. Because it is completely volunteer-led, there is no paid staff on site at Safe Harbor. So it really does take an army to come in and to facilitate this shelter this winter. So I'd love for you to take a look at this card. You can sign up from gtsafeharbor.org/sign-up, or even better, go and talk to Jamie in the lobby after the service where you can get signed up. Well, there's a couple other things in your program that you got when you walked in the door that I'd love to put on the list too. We have a men's breakfast coming up January 27th. So if you're a guy and you love food, this is a great event for you. And really, this is a great event. If you're not involved with the men's ministry, or if you're involved and you just want to get together to get to know more guys deeply, this is a great event. January 27th, join us for that. And I also want to let you know that January is when we're relaunching all of our ministry classes here at Kensington Church. We have everything from Money Mondays, we're calling it, where if you want to get a hold of your finances, to Bible basics. If you want to learn more about the Bible and deepen your faith that way, we have a lot of great opportunities. So you can stop at starting point, and they can point you in the right direction to get signed up for these classes. Well, as we get started, I'd love for everyone to stand up and give a high five or a handshake to those that are around you and ask them this question. How many inches of snow did you have to dig yourself out of this week? I just lost count at my house, honestly.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are we feeling today? Let's stay on our feet. We're going to sing This Is Living. Let's put those hands together. Here we go. Waking up knowing there's a reason. All my dreams come alive. Life is for living with you. I've made my decision. All right. Pick me up, fill my eyes with wonder. Forever young in your love, this freedom's untainted with you. The moment is wasted. See the sun, now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to colors all around. All is new in the saving light of fire. Here we go. This is living now. This is living now. All right, sing this out. You lead the way. You lead the way and got you right beside me. In your love, I'm complete. There's nothing like living with you. This life you've created, I choose. All right. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I found. Everybody sing. This is living now. This is living now. Take me higher than I've been before. It's your breath that never sees me soar. Got your freedom as an open door. You are everything I want and more. All right, let's have every voice sing this out. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. Let's try that again. See the sun. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. Everybody, this is living now. This is living now. Take me higher than I've been before. It's your love that never sees me soar. Got your freedom is an open door. You are everything I want and more.
What an awesome song to be singing about what it means to be living. And sometimes in our lives, there are those times where it's hard to feel like living. My full-time job, I'm a teacher. And I teach out in Leland, which is a teeny tiny little kindergarten through 12th grade building. So we're very, very close out there. And probably in the last 5 to 7 years, our little community out there has experienced 6 losses. 4 of them students, 2 of them kids of staff members, and 1 of them a staff member of our own. And it's when you hear about each one of those that when I get home, I hold my kids a little tighter, and I tell my husband more often, I love you. Because it's at those times that you can't understand why those things are happening. If there's a God, why would he allow things like that, so much pain, so much hurt to happen? And it's in those moments, too, that there's nothing I can do but go to God because I'm at a loss. And the wonderful thing is that we don't have to understand. It's part of our story. But the bigger story is the story that God's writing for us. And we don't always know what the ending is. We may never understand why those things happen. But we can trust and know that God is working things for our good. And that's what this next song is about, is it's letting the King of our heart reign and having confidence and courage that God is good. That he is good amidst the hurts. He is good amidst the sorrows. So right now, let's sing this kind of as our mantra. You are good, and you're never going to fail us. You're never going to turn your back on us. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. 'Cause you are good.
gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down.
so much for singing with us. Hey, let me say this. If it's your first time and you're like, oh my goodness, that song, like that's a lot to think about when you think about God, right? To say that God is good, but you know your story and you know your past and you know moments where you've maybe felt like that if there was a God, then I don't know if, I would even want to believe in that God because he let this happen. Here's what we believe here. I feel like over the last maybe 2.5 minutes, you've just got a beautiful glimpse about what we believe, both about you and about God, that even in our brokenness, even in our suffering, even in our most difficult circumstances, that we believe that there is a God in the midst of all of that. And the story of Christianity, the story of Jesus, the story of people who followed Jesus early on, is that story of people who came to God with all of their doubts, all of their questions, all their concerns, and said, here's all of it, and I'm going to come to you with all of those questions anyway and take steps towards you with those questions. So thank you so much for singing with us. We'd love for you to go ahead and have a seat. And if this is your first time again, we just want to say welcome. We're so glad that you're here. And then for us, I think, days like today are a big one because we're kicking off a series here in a few minutes called Crave. We'll be telling you a little bit more about that. But I think for us here at Kensington, there's a piece of us where we just look towards these kind of moments where Annie is talking, Brian's talking, leading these songs, where we really kind of discover and find our own humanity in the midst of that music. And we find our own humanity and our own brokenness in the midst of all of that. And throughout this series, throughout the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about what that looks like and how we navigate those kinds of things. And so what we're going to do before we move forward, I want to invite our ushers to come forward. We're going to receive our offering. For those of you who are part of Kensington, we just want to say thanks so much for giving. Thanks so much for being a part of this. And at Kensington, what we would say too is when you're here, there's different ways that you can engage. Obviously, there's giving. There's a way that you can engage in that. But I know Greg mentioned Safe Harbor a few minutes ago, and that's something that's really near and dear to our hearts. This year, in fact, what we're really pushing for is we're hoping that about 100 of you would decide that you would show up and be a part of Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor is coming up in a few weeks. Again, if you want more details, it's going to be out there. But I would say this, that when it comes to following Jesus, there's a part of this that's focused individually, but there's also a part of us where we look outwardly and we look at our city and we say, how can we make a significant impact here in Traverse City? We talk a lot about being together for Traverse City, and Safe Harbor is one of those areas that we can really do that and make a significant impact. So you can find Jamie out in the lobby. She'd love to talk to you more about that. We'll get you all those details as well. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to tell you before we jump in to the message content today. I want to introduce you to a couple people real quick. So I want to introduce you real fast. This is Megan. Everybody say, hey, Megan. Megan singing for the first time today, so we're so excited about her. Give it up for Megan singing. It's pretty great. And then I want to introduce you real fast. This is one of my favorite people now because he's a guitar player and he's real good. This is Keaton. Everybody say, hey, Keaton. Yeah, he's so cool. And the only thing is he has cooler glasses than me, but we won't talk about that. But Keaton's been playing with us now for a couple of weeks. In fact, if you were here for our render service, actually on Christmas Eve, right? Yeah, Keaton played at that. Phenomenal guitar player. And then the other thing I want to tell you, this is so good. If you're ever like, is render a great thing? Like, what's that about? So Keaton came, and then your family came to that render service, and then his sister showed up, and her fiance, no, it wasn't fiance yet. They were dating. I just ruined the story. That stinks. Well, that's great. And then after the message, because the message was so good, they went out and he actually proposed right out in the parking lot. So Casey and Madison just got engaged right on Christmas Eve. So we'll give it up for them. If they're here, they might be sinking down in their seat. But is it right here? Yeah. So now just pointed. So now they're really wanting to disappear. Let's just get the camera. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. No, I'm just kidding. So we're so glad that you guys are here. And congratulations. Now, as I said, we are kicking off a brand new series today called Crave. And again, we're so excited about this series. What we're doing is we're going to be talking about the cravings that we have, the appetites that we have when it comes to all the areas of our life. Some of those things that are positive and some of those things that can lead us in a direction that we never really intended to go in. Now, when it comes to this, we wanted to get your brain thinking about this before we jumped into the talk. And so our team had actually written a song around this. Annie's going to come. She's going to be singing this. But I want you to pay attention to the lyrics of this song and pay attention to what this says. We're going to invite Annie to come out and we're going to sing this song together.
For your attention, I just want to be known. I'd do anything just to be told you're perfect, you're beautiful. I'm striving to be unforgettable. The voice I hear the loudest says you're forgotten. strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worthless. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, 'cause I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting for love. I'm praying by the rules of your love, it's my condition. A perfectionistic addiction. Hope you don't see through my walls. I'm trying to be unforgettable. The voice I hear the loudest says you're forgotten. I strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worthless. I'm not worth it. I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, 'cause I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm striving for your love, I'm striving to be loved. I'm dying for your love, I'm dying to be loved. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, 'cause I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, 'cause I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm striving for your love, I'm striving to be loved. I'm dying for your love, dying to be loved. The voice I hear the loudest says you are forgotten. I strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worthless. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved.
Now, here's what I love what Annie just sang about, and I love the lyrics to that song, is because when you hear lyrics to that song, no matter where you are on the faith spectrum, no matter where you are on the age spectrum, no matter who you are in this room, there's something inside of every single one of us that would have to acknowledge that there are moments in our lives, that there are times in our lives where we just crave the approval of others, that we look out in terms of the relationships that we have and the people that are in our lives, and we just have this craving and this desire to look at other people and to be approved by some of them. Now, what we're going to talk about throughout this series is actually a word that we're going to look at every single week, because I think it's so important for us to acknowledge that there's something happening in our hearts and in our lives, in some ways that you have control over, in some ways that you don't. Sometimes it's subconscious, but there's something always happening in every single one of our lives, and they're connected to this, connected to appetites. Right? Now, we think about appetites all the time, like you have an appetite for chocolate. Anybody have chocolate? Anybody have a chocolate appetite right now? Yeah, that's right. So you have appetites for bacon. Any fellas? Bacon? Yeah, come on, preach, right? That's good. Yeah, so we have that. We have all sorts of appetites when it comes to those things. You also have appetites when it is connected to your heart, right? Like there are things about you when it comes to relationships that you are looking towards these appetites for approval. Some of you have these appetites for things that are just going to make you feel better than you feel right now. We're going to be talking about that next week. We have all these appetites that are in our hearts and in our lives. The problem with the appetites is that some of those appetites are really, really good for us. Like some of those appetites we need in our lives, but the ones that are so negative for us have a problem with connecting to our hearts and where we end up in life. And the reason there's a problem is because appetites, right? Ultimately, appetites only know one word, right? Appetites only know one word, and the word that they know is constantly happening and constantly pushing us forward. And the appetite word is this: it only knows more, right? Like, there's never going to be a day where you are done with chocolate. You're just not going to be done. You have an appetite that will not be fully and finally satisfied for chocolate. That's just how that works. There's some of you, when it comes to this, that you have this appetite for approval, which we're going to talk about today, that is never fully and finally satisfied no matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody does in your life. You just have this appetite that isn't going to be fully, finally satisfied. And in your heart, the only thing the appetite craves is more. It's constantly asking you to feed it. It's constantly asking you for more. And the reason this is so important for us is this: that appetites, right, we can say this, that appetites will control us if we don't learn to control them. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing. In some of these things, it's a moderation thing. But if we don't learn to control the internal appetites that we have, if we don't learn to navigate those things well, then they will end up controlling us. And you've seen this in people. I've seen this in people. I've had this in my life as well. And if we don't learn to control those appetites that we have, they will wreak havoc on our life. Now, the one we're going to talk about today, obviously, as Andy already sang about, is this appetite for approval. There's something inside of us that is craving approval from other people. And again, it is no respecter of persons. Every single one of us at some point or another has this thing inside of us where we crave approval from other people. Now, this actually starts from the time that we were kids, right? So I wanted to bring out just a couple of these props because for me, I actually acknowledged this for the very first time when I was a sixth grader, right? I was a sixth grader in math class. Do we have anybody in here who's really good at math? Anybody like you loved math? Get out. I'm just kidding, right? I'm just kidding, right? I never was, right? I just never had that gift. I always wanted to be good at math. I was the guy that when I got to elementary school, I went to like the advanced classes in 5th grade. And then I got to 6th grade and we started algebra. And I did not understand why they wanted to put letters with numbers. It just did not make sense in my mind. So I went to the advanced algebra class. Then the next year I went to the average algebra class. Then I went to the not so average algebra class. My entire middle school experience was me just getting worse at math. That's what it was. And all of a sudden for me, it connected in middle school. In 6th grade, I had this one teacher, and I walked in, I think it was like the 3rd or 4th day. She gave a pop quiz on what she had already talked about. And I sat in my desk, right? I sat at the desk. And as I'm sitting there, I took the test, and I knew I did terrible on it. And she walked back up to me, at the end of the next day. She gave the test back out. And she had written it like in big, bold letters, like, I think you can do better, right? And then she looked at me and she gave this like tone, and the way that she said it, it was like this constant disapproval when she put it on my desk. And I remember she called my mom into the office about midway through that year, and she just goes, you know what? He's just not good at this. He's not going to be good at this. And I'm sitting there in this conference meeting feeling awful, right? And I blame all of my problems on this woman. I'm just kidding, right? So, there's all of that sort of thing. And I sat there, and something happened in my mind and in my heart. And what happened for the rest of that year, some of you are like me, you know this. What happened for the rest of the year is the only thing I wanted when I got to her class was what? I just wanted her approval. Over and over and over again, I wanted her to like me. I wanted her to be happy. And even in the moments when I got frustrated or mad or angry, it was still rooted in this deep desire for the approval from this math teacher. Now, if you fast forward, I went to high school in my junior year of high school, or senior year of high school. I started playing guitar. I was a sports person until I got a guitar. My mom bought me my first guitar. So I get to my senior year, and they said, hey, you can skip half the day and go study guitar at this jazz school if you want to do that. And I said, yes, that's so much better than my math class, right? So I decided that I was going to do that. And so senior year of high school, for the first half of the year, what I would do is I'd spend half the day in my classes, and the second half of the day, I'd go to this jazz school and this professor who taught jazz. Now, has anybody ever seen the movie Whiplash? Anybody ever seen the movie Whiplash? Right. So it's about this jazz teacher who is really harsh on his students, really, really harsh on his students. And so I remember going there, and the one thing I felt like I could get a lot of the parts down. The thing that I struggled with was reading sheet music, because I grew up where I just learned how to play by ear. And so this is so bad, I would memorize the songs and go in there and pretend like I was reading the sheet music, and I would fake it the whole time. And I was good enough to be able to fake it, that sort of thing. But about midway through the year, I think he started picking up on it a little bit, and I was faking it. And finally, he put a piece of music in front of me that I had not seen before. And my girlfriend was in the class at the time. Now, I want you to picture this. And so he said, I want you to read this. And I, fumbled my way through it. It was so embarrassing in front of the whole class. And though he wanted to teach me a lesson, right? And so what he does is he calls over my girlfriend. He slows the tempo down to almost like a quarter of the speed, and he gives her a pencil. And he said, I want you to point to each note as the note comes by in front of the whole. So he called me in front of the whole class, brings my girlfriend up in the front of the class, and he has her do this sort of thing. Now, I'm sitting there, and I'm saying words that I don't even know if they were profane, but I was so upset. And I was playing these notes, and it was so embarrassing and so bad. And two things happened in my mind and in my heart in that moment. I was angry and frustrated at him, but something marked my heart that said, I want the approval of him, and I want the approval of everybody else in this class. And if you've ever been embarrassed from the time you were a child, you know what that's like. Now, I think as we get older, we think that a lot of that goes away. We call it peer pressure when you're a kid, or we call it peer pressure when you're in middle school or high school. But for me, I actually continue to experience this throughout the rest of my life. Now, at 27 years old, some of you know this, 27 years old, we were in Ohio. I had no idea what we were planning on doing, and then they talked to us about this church here in Traverse City, Michigan. A lot of you know, I had no idea where Traverse City was at the time. We looked it up on a map. It was north of Canada, and I was like, I didn't know that was possible. That's cool. So it was we're going to hang out with Santa. And so we decided to do that. And in the midst of the merger, we brought in all these consultants. And we talked to them. And every single one of them said one thing, and I think it was so good, is that the guy who founded this church, a guy named Nick Toomey, amazing leader, amazing speaker, just an incredible man. And they said, you need to know, number one, you're half his age, right, which is about, when we came in. And number two, there's all these people that will love him, and they may or may not love you just because you're not him. And I'm like, oh, I'm fine. And I talked to them about my personality type. I'm fine. I'm good, And then I got here, and, almost everybody was great, but every once in a while I would speak, and then I'd get an email back about somebody who didn't like it. And sometimes it was theology stuff, and that never bothered me that much. And then we get emails every once in a while about, you could say this differently, and I try to take that criticism, and I listen to it. But then I got one email about 6 months in, and what they did is I think this might be the same pair of socks, is I got an email, and they wrote me, and they said, hey, I just think you could dress better, and I think that you could actually pay more attention to the socks that you wear. Now, I'm a tennis shoes, and I'm a tube socks kind of guy. That's what I do almost every week. In fact, and this was actually so funny because this was actually these are the socks that I would wear almost every weekend, and this person was very, very angry about it. Now, I had gotten a lot of emails. I called a lot of people that were frustrated. I did the whole deal. But you know what sent me over the edge? The only thing I got frustrated about, right? I think really through the whole thing was this email about my socks. That's the only, and if you'd ask me, the only time I really came home, I can't believe they, and do you know what, and if they really, and I don't even know if they're Christian, that whole deal, Now, here's why this matters. I want to tell you why this matters. Because what happened after that, it had nothing to do with socks. What happened after that for me is I started thinking about it all the time. And then I'm with our staff one night at Walmart, and Greg, who's our, that sounds weird. I'm with our staff at Walmart. We're on a retreat. I'm with our staff at Walmart. And one of our staff members, his name is Greg. He was up here earlier. He's our campus director. We were joking around about socks. He goes, yeah, I think you should wear black socks. And you know what was so funny is I, all of a sudden had this rush of emotion in my heart and in my mind where I go, well, you don't like my socks? What's wrong with my socks? And I had this whole approval thing with Greg about it. And he's like, socks are so stupid. It is so stupid. But you know what it does? Is sometimes when it comes to those moments, we feel inadequate. The problem that's happening in our hearts is that we've attached a desire to please people to our ability to feel adequate at what we do. And weeks and weeks after that, I'd get up and I'd speak or whatever, and I would sit here on the stool, because you can see my socks a lot of times I sit on the stool. And I'd feel apprehensive about it. Because there was this thing inside of me that in some ways is uncontrollable, of this desire to be liked and approved, especially when you get up and you talk in front of people all the time, that sort of thing. Where you just desire and you have this craving for the approval of other people. And that's rooted in this emotion of inadequacy. Now, you've seen this with people all the time. Now, you've seen this with friends that you've had, where you ever seen somebody goes to the gym and they feel inadequate when it comes to their body. And I think you should work out. I think you should care about your health. In fact, that's one of the things that we're going to talk about in this series, right? But if you look like that, you're good. You know, I just feel like you're probably good. But like if you have this thing inside of you, some people go to the gym not just for health, but because to seek the approval of other people. We live in a society that's very focused on selfies, right? Like you go, and I think it's so fun. You know, we do like Instagram and Snapchat and all that sort of stuff. But there are times where you take a selfie and you post it, and what you're only looking for is the number of likes that you can get. And every single like that comes through is like this thing that triggers your brain where it says, now you're like, now you're enough. Now you have what you need. And here's another one. This is always fun. How many of us have ever bought something not just because we wanted it, but because we knew other people would know that we had it? Anybody ever done that, right? You bought that car for a status thing, and you didn't even care about the car that much. You just cared that your neighbor knew you could buy that car. And there's something inside of you. It's like you didn't necessarily need the curved thing, but you wanted the curved thing because it was super cool. And you wanted other people to come over to your house and go, oh, yeah, well, he's got the, you know. And this desire for approval there. We do this all the time in relationships, right? All the time in relationships. We want people to know that we're dating somebody or, you know, that our marriage is great. We put this whole thing up around, you know, everything is great for us. But when it comes like deep down to the relational part, you know that you had like this massive fight before you showed up to their house. And you put on like the smile and the big, you know, whatever that is. Because, why? You were looking for the approval of other people. Now, my favorite one is this. I played sports as a kid, and I think this one's always fun. When you have, like, kids that play sports, yeah, I think this is awesome. I played sports. I was like AAU's teams. We traveled all the time. But you always had the parents on the team that were living their lives through their kids, right? And you know, there's this thing where it's like I get approval when my child does well because there was something inside of me that makes you look at my child and go, well, that was great, and you must be a great parent. Happens all the time because we have this craving for approval. Now, there's a pastor in California. His name is Rick Warren, and he has this illustration around this that I think is so powerful. He got a letter from somebody as he was talking about some of what we're going to talk about today. And there was this one specific line in this quote from this letter from this college-age student that I thought was so powerful. And then we're going to launch into one other thing after this. But I want to do this quote. This is from a college-age student out in California. This college student says, I'm tired of saying yes to people just because I'm afraid to say no. I'm tired of caring too much about what other people think about me. I'm tired of being manipulated and used, but in many ways it's my fault. And then here's kind of the pinnacle of the quote. It says this. Sometimes I feel that I don't even know who I am. I'm just a collection of the expectations of other people. That the way that I live my life is this massive collection of expectations that other people have of me. So, for you, I'm curious, what would it take for you to actually feel fully and finally significant in your life? How many promotions would you need? At what point in the company would you need that? What would it take for you to feel fully and finally adequate in your life? And the one that I think hits home the most for me, right, is this one. What would it take for you to feel enough? Enough to be worthy of unconditional love. Enough to feel like you're a great parent. Enough to feel like you're an amazing spouse. Enough to feel like you can navigate your singleness well and not need or crave the approval of someone else. What would it take for you to feel like you're enough? Now, what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring in an expert on this. And the guy that we wanted to show you this clip of is a guy named Jack Wilson. Jack is an incredible, incredible man. I've met with Jack several times since we've been here, and he's kind of like our staff counselor. And he's super qualified. He's an amazing, amazing guy. In fact, he's got such an incredible track record. He was a sports psychologist for years. Then he was a caddy on the PGA Tour because he kind of could get into the brain of the person that he was working with. He has all of these like moments where he's done things. In fact, I would say the vast majority of people on our staff could point to Jack and say he's just really helped them think through something or shift something. And Jack talks about this need for approval, but not just the emotional need that we have, but the physiological side of this as well. So I wanted to show you this video with Jack about what it looks like for us to crave approval.
So Jack, we're talking about cravings, addictions in this series. How would you define that? I know you deal with this kind of stuff all the time in your own life.
Sure.
But obviously counseling people. How would you define a craving that a person can't say no to?
Well, a craving is both psychological and physiological. and when we get, whether it's craving for chocolate or craving for alcohol or craving for a controlled substance, we actually have kind of a physiological change, in the whole mind-body system. And thinking about that, visualizing it. You've heard me say that 24 hours a day, we're constantly talking to ourselves, both in words and in pictures. And when we have cravings, those show up as pictures in our brain, and a picture is worth what? 1,000 words, right? So when we picture the object of our desire, or at some point perhaps the object of our addiction, then it basically overpowers the whole system. And makes us think about it in a compulsive. You can almost use compulsive and craving sort of as synonyms.
Now, how do I know, or how does a person know when a craving is good and when it gets dangerous?
Whenever a craving interferes with our ability to lead a normal, healthy, relationship-centered life, then it's something we really ought to be giving some serious thought to.
So let's say week 1 of this series, I struggle with your approval and everybody's approval.
Yeah.
How can I test that to see if it's really determining how I feel?
Okay, if you're struggling with approval, then there's a variety of different things that you want to do, but you want to begin having an attitude change, okay? Because approval is an attitude. And attitudes are incredibly powerful, okay? So if you have an attitude that I need somebody's approval, then start thinking differently, start visualizing differently, but in that process, start kind of analyzing, where did this come from? I'm really big on personality types and things like that, and certain personality types are more likely to care about other people's attitudes. So we want to start there. Some people grew up in dysfunctional families, and they were not allowed to be who they really are. So they become very concerned about approval because they were trying to fake it without even knowing they were faking it, because that was their environment. But they've not been allowed to express who they truly are. So you start thinking in terms of kind of in the existential sense, who am I? And if you grew up in a dysfunctional family that did not allow you to develop by trying things out, by making mistakes, by talking honestly about your emotions, then you're going to have to go through some of that.
Now, I love what Jack said, because when he talks about some of our upbringing and when he talks about some of the places that we've come from, for some of you, this happened early on. For some of you, it's progressed through adulthood. For some of you, you brought this into a marriage or a relationship that you have. And so what I want to do just for a couple of minutes is I want to look at a passage of Scripture where there's a writer who talks specifically about some of these appetites and desires that we have. And the guy that writes about this is a guy named Paul. Now, Paul wrote about half the New Testament. If you're new to Christianity, or, if you don't read your Bible very much, Paul wrote, again, about half the New Testament. And he has this incredible story where he turns to Jesus and gives his entire life and shifts everything that he was doing, everything that he was a part of, in a direction where he begins to plant churches all over the ancient world. Now, because he wrote half the New Testament, because of the way that he lived, and because he ended up being a martyr, right, a lot of people point to Paul and say, well, he just should have had it all together. But right in the middle of a letter to a group of people that he wrote to in Rome, he actually says some things that feels very startling, but at the same time, for us, thousands of years later, I think it actually speaks to exactly where we find ourselves when it comes to these cravings and these appetites. So here's what Paul says. This is Paul talking about himself. He said, so I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, we're going to come back to that, for in my inner being, I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work. And I think this is so fascinating the way he phrases this. I see another law at work in me. Now, Paul's emphasis in this section and the struggles that he kind of talks about are things where he says there's something in my inner being and there's something in me. And what's in me and what's in my inner being seems to be kind of in conflict with one another, seems to be like it's just not working out. It seems like they're fighting. In fact, the language that he's going to talk about when he talks about this inner being is actually going to be this violent kind of language in terms of what's going on inside of him. But the struggle that he's facing, and this is what we're going to look at, he's looking at appetites that he has in both directions. That I have an appetite for things that are good, and I have an appetite for things that could potentially wreak havoc on my life. So he says this, but I see another law at work in me, and it goes on and says, what's in me is waging war against the law of my mind. It's waging war against my thoughts and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work in me. Now, this is the guy that wrote half the New Testament. This is the guy that planted churches all over the ancient world. In fact, if you're here and you're not Jewish, most of us probably wouldn't be here if Paul hadn't taken the gospel to people who weren't Jewish, right? He does all of these amazing things throughout history. He's kind of revered in a lot of the things that he's doing, and he's saying, inside of me, there's this war happening in my heart, this war happening in my mind, where both are at work. And I find myself a prisoner or a slave to that which is inside of me, because there's an appetite and a craving for more and more and more and more of both. There's the appetite and craving for the things that are good in my heart and in my life, and an appetite and a craving that is calling out for more of the things that aren't good as well. Then he goes on and he says this. He says, what a wretched man I am. Now, here's why I love that he says this. Because oftentimes people that are followers of Jesus or Christians, at least what we talk about and what we put out with people, is this glossed over perfectionistic, this is how we are, and it's good. In fact, a lot of people would talk about that are non-Christians, what's the big problem with Christianity? They would say they're fake. They don't acknowledge what's actually going on in their heart and in their lives. And Paul, with all of his accolades, say, I am a wretched man. And then he begs the question that I think we should all wrestle with, and that's this. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Who will redeem the brokenness that is in me? Now he kind of throws back with a rescue word to this violent kind of wretched and waging a war in me. Who will rescue me and save me? And the deeper question of that is this. Is freedom actually possible? Is it possible for us to experience the kind of freedom where we don't have to carry the weight of the negative effects of craving approval with others? Paul talks about how we manage it in our own lives, but he talks about the source of this, and here's what he says. He says, thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ, our Lord. So then I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. He separates himself through the power of Jesus Christ, but he says freedom is possible, not through him, but through submission to Christ. Now, here's what that doesn't mean. That doesn't mean that I just prayed a prayer one day and all of a sudden it's like, poof, gone. What that doesn't mean is that just because I prayed a prayer in Vacation Bible School, that all of a sudden now my life looks different. Paul lays out after this what our responsibility in this is, and here's what he says. He says, those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what that nature desires. Even as a follower of Jesus, even though freedom has been offered to you, the way your mind is set is going to dictate and determine so much of your life. And then he goes on and says this. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. Now, for years, I would read this passage and I'd struggle through it and kind of wrestle with it. And the reason is because you get this picture of a very broken, but yet powerful man in early Christianity who did so many amazing things. The beauty of this passage is that Paul acknowledges all of his inner brokenness and all of his inner pain and suffering and angst and these appetites that go in different directions. But as Paul writes in Romans, and as Paul is going to write later on in other parts of the Bible, Paul acknowledges that for those of us who've decided to follow Jesus, that freedom is already ours. That you don't have to live as a slave to the approval of other people. That you don't have to live as a slave to the thoughts that you have. That you don't have to live as a slave to the baggage that you've carried in your past. That Paul is saying freedom has already been offered to you when Jesus died on the cross and he rose from the grave. That when Jesus took all the sin of the world and he took all the pain and all the angst, he took it all on himself. And that he conquered it all through his death and his resurrection. Paul is saying freedom is yours. Even though you have this brokenness and this sinful nature, freedom is yours. Take it. That you shift your mind and you shift your heart and you shift your life and you acknowledge the fact, as he's going to write about later, that you have been adopted into a kingdom that has the potential to give you all the freedom in the world that you need. That you have been, as a follower of God, now adopted as a son or daughter and a co-heir with Christ. That you have everything that you need because you are no longer slave. You are no longer bound by that. In fact, here's how Paul says that. He says it like this. The mind of a sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. Which means it doesn't matter how many self-help books you've read. It doesn't matter how many blogs you've read. It doesn't matter how much comparison you do with some other person. It doesn't matter how much you discipline yourself. That life and peace are only found when we acknowledge who Jesus has made us to be. When we acknowledge that freedom is ours. And we're not seeking the approval from God. But we are living out who he's made us to be. So my question to you, if you ever struggle with approval, if you ever navigate this, the question for you is this. Are you living for the approval of God? Or are you living from the approval of God that you already have? Are you a person who lives your life either acknowledging that God exists, and if he exists, then he's forcing you to kind of get towards perfection? Or are you the person that says, I am a child of God, and it's from that freedom that I live my life? That it's from that freedom that I have this desire for the things that God has for me. Will I live from it, or will I constantly be living my life for the approval of God and for the approval of others? Because the people who find peace and the life, the abundant life that Jesus talks about, are the people who have decided that they're going to take the freedom that has already been offered to them through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. Now I want you to hear the story of somebody who acknowledged that and navigated that through their life. Her name is Judy. Let's look at her story.
When I was young, I loved my mom. She was just a gorgeous, really talented person, just beautiful. She didn't have any self-worth. She wasn't a Christian and had already been left from one husband. This was her second marriage. And I think she knew my dad was having affairs, and she just did whatever it took. She was a June Cleaver during the day and a Marilyn Monroe at night. I watched that in her life, and I thought, well, if it worked for her, I guess the whole time until I got married, I just thought that's what I would have to do. Eventually, I started getting interested in boys. I started dressing kind of seductively, and I didn't think I could get approval just for who I was. When I was 15, Johnny came into my life. He was everything I ever wanted. I knew the minute I met him that I would never let him go. It wasn't even 6 months. We were having sex. And a lot of times, if he would want to take me home early or anything, that's how I would keep him. One night I came home after being out late in Johnny's car, and my father was up. He had been drinking, and he called me a slut. I guess I thought that if anybody could spot one, he could. because of the way his life was. And I never got his approval, I guess. Or maybe I did. I don't know. I thought women were supposed to be like that. And that's all they were good for, because that's the way he treated my mom. And that's the picture I had of myself. Eventually, Johnny and I did get married. I remember Johnny always saying to me, all I want from you is I want you to look good, smell good, and take care of the children. That's all I ever thought about was how I looked. And if he would even come home for lunch and I didn't have my makeup on or my lipstick on or something, he would say, are you sick? Don't you feel good? I couldn't really be myself. I could never be myself. I always had to wear a mask. I didn't feel like I could ever just be who I was. I found a Playboy magazine under the mattress. I got really mad, very angry. I felt very rejected, and I knew I had competition. One night, I had a candlelight dinner all set for him. The kids were tucked in bed, and he called and said he wouldn't be home because he had some other things that he had to do. By the time he got home, I was so angry. I went out, and I had an affair. Just a one-time affair. I couldn't believe that I had done that. I came home and I told him, hoping that he would show some kind of concern, but he didn't. He let me know that he really didn't care. About 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant, and then we were really scared. I knew that it wasn't my husband's baby. I went and had an abortion. And one of the reasons I had the abortion was so that nobody would know what I did, that I had been unfaithful. I wanted to hide it. I didn't want my children ever to know that I wasn't the perfect mother, a perfect wife. I decided one night that I couldn't live with myself anymore for what I'd done. So I was standing in the bathroom and considering taking my life, and the phone rang at 3 a.m. It was my twin sister. What she told me was that an angel woke her up and said to call me because I was in trouble. So I remember hanging up the phone, going in my living room, and praying to God, if you're real, please show me. So 3 weeks later, we went to a Billy Graham crusade. It was like he knew my story. There were 75,000 people there. And the first scripture he quoted was about the adulterous woman. And I remember him saying that Isaiah 1:18 said that even though your sins are red as scarlet, that he would wash you as white as wool, that he would forgive you. It was news I never knew. I had no idea that God was like that. I thought God was like my dad, that he was angry all the time, and I should be scared of him. I went to the altar and asked Jesus into my heart, because that's what I wanted. I wanted forgiveness. He said I could be made brand new. I remember going home, and I saw myself as a completely different person. I was just totally free to be who I wanted to be, and it wouldn't matter who got mad at me if I didn't, act the way they wanted me to act. All that mattered is that what God thought of me. Even though I knew mercy and grace from God, I still didn't have that mercy and grace for Johnny. I put a lot of blame on him for my actions. He visited a church that I was attending, and again, the evangelist was preaching his story, and he got saved. I saw a change in Johnny that was incredible. After the Billy Graham crusade, I found out that I was pregnant. I just couldn't believe that God would allow me, would trust me to be a mom again after what I'd done, that he would really trust me. So for the next 9 months, I was scared to death. So the day came when I went to the hospital and delivered the baby. And the nurses and the doctors kept looking at me saying, Judy, look at your baby. He's just a beautiful baby boy. And I didn't want to look because of that fear of punishment. And I finally looked at my child, John Dempsey Stoll. And that's when I really saw mercy and grace. I couldn't believe it, that God would give me this beautiful baby. He gave me beauty for ashes. I just thank God every day.
Some of you hear a story like that, and it feels like it's your story. And the pieces are different, the puzzle pieces are maybe slightly different, but there's something inside of you that goes, I don't know if freedom is actually possible. Like, I've done all of this, I'm continuing to do all of this, I have the desire to do all this, but how do I find freedom? And what you've done is you've attached a label to your heart. You've allowed something else to define you. You've allowed your perception to define you. You've allowed your past sin to define you. You've allowed what you're currently involved in to define you. And some of you have prayed and you've prayed and prayed over and over again. Some of you, you've asked forgiveness over and over and over again. The one thing that you've never done is allow the one who came for you, died on the cross for you, rose again from the grave for you, to speak into who you are. That you've allowed all these other things to define you. And I think for us, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, for those of you who are on the fringe, you're trying to figure out the faith thing, for those of you who look at your life and it feels like it's in shambles and you're broken, I feel like you just need to hear this, that the one who designed you, the one who knew about you before you were ever born, the one who had a plan for you no matter what it is that you've done up to this point in your life, the one who loves you unconditionally, the one who designed me is the only one who should define me. Your sin does not define you anymore. Freedom is yours. Your past doesn't define you anymore. Freedom is yours. And all God is waiting on you to do is to come to him with all of it and say, here it is. Here's all my mess. Here's all my brokenness. Here's all my identity issues. Here's all of that. I am no longer a slave. So out of this talk, typically we try to give you some practical, next steps. What I want for you as we kick off this series is I want you to see 3 statements that I think are so true and so foundational to living out our lives as followers of Jesus. And that's this: that you are not a slave to the approval of other people. Some of you need to, in your mind, say that over and over again. You're not a slave to the approval of your father. You're not a slave to the approval of your parents. You're not a slave to the approval of your spouse. You're not a slave to the approval of other moms who look at how you parent. You're not a slave to the approval of people who disagree with you. You're not a slave to the approval of your boss. You are not a slave to the approval of others. The second one is this: that you are enough to receive unconditional love. And no matter what decision you've made, what decisions you're currently making, or decisions you will make, that there is a God who loves you. And he's pursuing your heart, and you are enough for unconditional love. And the last one is one that I feel like if every single one of us embraced, I wouldn't probably even have to speak on the weekends and all these sorts of things. And I have to remind myself of this constantly, and that's this: that you are a child of God. And some of you have heard that for years and years and years. You never just sat in it. The word that is constantly used over and over in Scripture to describe God is Father. That you're a child of the living God. And the question for you is this: will you live for the approval of God, or will you live from the approval of God? So I was trying to think, how do we kind of wrap this up, tie on a bow? And And we have a song that we're going to do that's one of my favorite songs ever that we're going to sing here in just a second. And we chose the song, and then the other night we were here kind of late. Emily was programming stuff, and I was sitting back there watching a message, and I'm with my little boy. He's like almost 2. He's getting close to 2 years old, and I got to thinking, like, this is the perfect picture of this. I'm watching TV. He's playing around in there, and then he walks up to me, and with both hands, he grabs my face and turns my face to him, and like pulls me near, like, look at me, And so I like hugged him, and I looked at him for a second, and he put his head on my shoulder, and I'm like, I think we're good now. Now I can go back to doing what I was doing, And he, like, 5 seconds go by, and he comes back, and he looks at me a little bit frustrated, because he could probably beat me up, and he looks at me, both hands again, turns my face towards him, pulls me close, like, look at me. And I thought to myself, in some way, even almost 2, he's craving approval from Dad, But then I got to thinking, for us, the way that the scriptures talk about God is you have a perfect Heavenly Father who you don't ever have to do that to. He's already looking at you. And he looks at you and he sees you fully. And he knows your past, he knows your present, he knows your future. And he looks at you and he says, I love you right now just the way you are unconditionally. And you are mine. And you have all the approval that you need. And I think what our job in that is to come to God and look back and to fix our eyes on the one who loves us unconditionally forever and has said, you are enough. So the song that we're going to wrap up with today is Annie and Megan are going to sing this. I want to read these lyrics to you. The first verse, I never read the first verse until this week, and it says this: O soul, are you wearied and troubled? No light in the darkness you see. There's a light for a look at the Savior and life more abundant and free. And the part that we're going to sing today, and I'm going to ask you to sing it out with everything you have, is this. It says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in light of his glory and grace. I want to ask you to stand with me, and I want to pray over you. I'm going to invite Annie and Megan on the stage, and we're going to sing this together as we wrap up our time. Let's pray together. Father, God, I ask that in these next few moments, as just together, we just sing out these words, that it would be so true of us. And some of us have been living from approval of others. Some of us have been living from judging ourselves. Some of us have been living from a posture of sin, and we've never accepted the full freedom that you've offered us. And so, God, I pray in this moment, for some of us for the very first time, that we would, as we sing this, choose to fix our eyes on you. And God, that we would stay fixed on you. God, that we would accept the fact that you see us fully and you love us fully. And God, that you would help us to acknowledge that we are your children and that we are enough. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Sing it out. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face,
Thanks for singing along, everyone. We're going to close with one more song, so I'm going to ask you to remain standing here. And this song, it's got to be one of my most favorite songs to sing right now. And it's a song called No Longer Slaves. And I think since this is the first Sunday of the new year, it's the perfect opportunity to really make this declaration today. Because I know many of us are making our resolutions. We're coming into this new year. We feel surrounded by fear. We're feeling burdened. And some of us may be even questioning if we really even believe all of this. And I want to tell you that I feel like I'm right there with you. You know, I don't have all the answers. I feel like I have the same spiritual highs, the same spiritual lows. And something that feels kind of crazy to say, but in a way, I kind of look forward to the lows, because every time I've hit one of these spiritual lows, God has always pulled me out of it. And when he does, it's been amazing. So if you're feeling this way today, I'm just going to encourage you to make this your anthem. It says, it's straight from Scripture. The chorus is right in Paul's letter to the Galatians. It says, for you are no longer a slave to fear, for you are a child of God. So if you believe these words, God's going to tear down those walls. He's going to overcome those burdens. He's going to drown those fears in his perfect love. So let's sing this together.
You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. Let's every voice sing that. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I am surrounded by the arms of the Father, and I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage. We're the sons and the daughters I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God.
Thanks so much for singing with us. For some of you, that is your story. For some of you, that is where you are right now. And you need to be reminded of that when you walk out. So here's kind of the big practical application that I'd give you if you could. So if you're like, hey, you were like talking directly to me, how did he know? Like whatever that is. You know? I think what would be the best thing for you is to write on a note card and put it somewhere where you see it every single day. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to any of those things. I think that would be one of the best things that you could do so that you continue to remind yourself of who God says that you are. Again, thanks so much for being here today. What we're going to do is wrap up our time. If it is your first time, you're like, you know what, I have questions, and I'd love to talk to somebody. We'd love to connect with you. We have an environment called Starting Point out in the lobby. We could love to connect with you there, or if you just like to talk to one of our staff members, you can do the startingpoint.today. That'll give you all the information you need. And then some of you, you're here today, and you're like, I would just love to talk to somebody or pray with somebody, and we would love to connect with you as well. We're actually going to have our prayer team up here at the front. They would love to connect with you, talk to you a little bit. If like today just kind of opened up some things where you would love just to have a conversation with somebody about that. Again, thanks so much for being here. We'll be part 2 of Crave next week. It's going to be a great week. Come back, bring somebody with you next week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks so much.
Hey, we are glad that you joined us today, and I wanted to see if I could grab Patrick for a moment. Patrick, hey, a powerful message. Yeah, online.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, so something that I think we all wrestle with to a certain degree, just that craving approval. But what do you say to that person who is like, I am letting other people's approval really just control me or control my actions? Like, where do they even go to take that next step?
No, that's good. I think what I would say, and I get to talk to a lot of different people, so this is fun. And what's so interesting is it doesn't really matter if you're like a CEO of a large company or if you're like a 19-year-old teenager, an intern. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't even matter about faith. A lot of us feel this approval thing, and it's gripped our lives. And so what I would say to that is one of the best things that you could do right now is just to start and then tell somebody. You just need to tell somebody, have a conversation with somebody that you trust and you care about. Hey, I'm struggling with the approval of, and then fill in the blank. And I think the quicker you can get to a name or a person or a group of people or a boss or whatever that is, or mommy blogs, whatever that is. We both have young kids, so we know about that. Yeah. Not that we read mommy blogs.
I don't read mommy blogs.
But we'll talk about that later. But, like wherever you are on those kinds of things, I think admitting that and then talking to somebody first is the best thing. And then I would say this, from what Paul was talking about, it really involves changing our minds, changing our mindset, and shifting those things. Yeah. And so I think I said it at the end of the service today, but one of the best things that you could do is maybe print out a note card. Sometimes I'll do this on my laptop. I'll print out a label and just put something up top to remind me, or where I get dressed in the morning. I have all kinds of note cards. It's fun. But I think that's one of the best things you could do, because I think continually reminding yourself of the truth that you are a child of God and you're not a slave to that anymore. Freedom is actually yours. I think that just starting your day that way, reminding yourself of that throughout the day is one of the best things you can do.
Awesome. Yeah? Cool, yeah. Well, thanks so much. Yeah,
thanks so much for watching. Yeah.
Hey, we are glad that you joined us today. And if you are in town here in Traverse City or even Metro Detroit or even Orlando, Florida, we would love to have you in person at one of our campuses. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to hear what we're up to at Kensington, Traverse City, so that you can be a part of this movement. Well, we'll see you soon. Hey everyone, my name is Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an amazing service planned for you. We have Brian and we have Ann and we have Megan who are going to lead us in some amazing music today. We also have our lead pastor, Patrick Holden, who will be giving a message, the first in a series that we're calling Crave. Hey, and we thank you too for sharing our content online, whether it's through Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You really are a part of sharing our message of hope, not just in the region here, but actually around the world. Well, we are just about getting started. You are really in for a treat. And again, thanks for being here, and let's get going. Well, good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Good. Hey, my name is Greg, and I am privileged to be on staff here at Kensington Traverse City. We are really glad that you are here today. And if it's your first time, extra special welcome. This is a safe place to explore your faith. And if it's your first time, I'd love you to even pull out your phone, because what you can do there, if you're interested in taking that next step, you can go to startingpoint.today. That's startingpoint.today. You fill out a couple questions, and it'll get that ball rolling about how can I get to know more about what's going on here, whether it's if you have kids and you want them involved in our awesome kids environments, or teens, or looking to get a part of a small group. That's a great place to go, startingpoint.today. Well, we have an amazing service planned for you. The band is going to lead us in some incredible music, and our lead pastor, Patrick Holden, will be giving a message in the first of a series we're entitling Crave. So we'll be together for about 70 minutes, and then we'll get you out here into that snowy wonderland that we live in here in northern Michigan. So one other note for the day is that today's service has a rating of PG-12. And what we mean by that is there's some content going to be shared in a video later in the service that may not be suitable for children elementary age or for 12 and under. So if you have a child here today, we've got some great environments for them going on. You can head back out into the lobby, and our greeters will be very happy to show you where elementary kids and even a great teen environment is there as well. So a couple things before we get started. You found this on your seat or next to your seat. If you want to pull that out, and it says on the card, it says 90 of your neighbors won't risk their lives sleeping outside this winter because of you. And then it has a Safe Harbor logo. And if you're new to this place or maybe new to Traverse City, you might not know what Safe Harbor is. Safe Harbor is a ministry that partners with local churches that provides shelter for people without homes during the coldest months of the year. And man, we are in a cold snap. And so this has been a life send literally to people in our community. And now what we're talking about is that we're going to be asking our people to sign up to help. The amazing thing about Safe Harbor is that it's completely volunteer run. There is no paid staff. They have an amazing facility, opened brand new actually this year. But what we're asking our church is that to partner with us, because we need around 150 people to make the week that is our church is covering to make it happen. That's February 10th through the 17th. So the way to be involved is actually you can go to gtsafeharbor.org/sign-up, or even better than that, you can go and talk to Jamie, who's going to be in the lobby right after the service. She'd love to get you more information and get you signed up to help during that week. And if you want to pull out this, the program that was handed to you, there's a couple things on there that I'd love to put on your radar. The first one is the men's breakfast coming on January 27th. Now, if you're a guy and you love breakfast and you love bacon, then this is the environment for you. But really, if you're not involved in the men's ministry, this is a great first step. You can come and get to know some of the great guys that are part of our men's ministry. And also, there's going to be a speaker, a presenter that day, and it's just going to be an awesome time together. So I invite you to be part on January 27th. And then the third thing was actually just to look, we have a whole list here on your program of ministry classes that are all launching this month. So our men's ministry, our women's ministry, a couple things to highlight is actually our Money Mondays, we're calling it. So if you've ever been through the Financial Peace University, you know what that is. If you don't know what that is, and you're like, this year I really want a handle on my finances, this is a great opportunity for you to come and talk and get some support on making wiser decisions in this coming year about your money. And also, we have a Bible basics class that's going to be starting here soon. If you're wanting to learn more about what the Bible says about your life, or just you want to dive deeper into God's Word, this is a great opportunity for you. So if you're interested in any of these classes, I encourage you to go out and talk to Starting Point, and they will get you connected to the right people where you can get information there. Well, I'd love everyone to stand up, please. Stand up and give a handshake or a high five to those around you and ask them this question. How many inches, or maybe I should say feet, of snow did you have to dig out of this week? I lost count at my house.
All right, you guys ready to sing? We got a fun one to open this up with. Let's put those hands together. We're going to sing This Is Living.
Waking up knowing there's a reason. All my dreams come alive. Life is for living with you. I made my decision. All right. You pick me up, fill my eyes with wonder. Forever young in your love, this freedom's untainted. With you, a moment is wasted. All right. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. Are you ready? This is living now. This is living now. All right, you lead the way. You lead the way, got you right beside me. In your love, I'm complete. There's nothing like living with you. This life you've created, I choose. All right, sing it out. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I am found. Everybody sing it out. This is living now. This is living now. Take me higher than I've been before. It's your perfect love that saves me so. Got your freedom, it's an open door. You are everything I want and more. All right. Let's see every hand put together like this. We're gonna sing this together. See the sun. You ready? See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. Let's try that again. See the sun. Here we go. See the sun now bursting through the clouds, black and white, turns to color all around. All is new in the Savior I have found. Everybody sing. This is living now.
know about you, but right now I feel like it is kind of black and white all around out there, right? So we'll hope that the sun comes bursting through today. In my regular life, not being up here serving at Kensington, I'm a teacher. And I teach out in Leland, and we're a very small school out there. We're actually a kindergarten through 12th grade all in one building. And throughout the last probably 5 to 7 years, our tiny school community has experienced a significant amount of loss. It's one of those situations where in the morning when you come into work, you fear that you're going to get the intercom system telling you, all staff, please report to the library. We've lost 4 students, various incidences, drowning, suicide, cancer. 2 of our staff members have lost children of their own, one at 4 months old. And we've lost a staff member as well that was very near and dear to our hearts. And it's at those times that I go home and I hug my kids a little tighter. I remember to say I love you more to my family, to my husband. But it's also those times where I don't understand. Why does that have to happen? The wonderful thing is that we're not meant to understand, as crazy as that sounds. Because God has the big picture in all of this. And this is God's story. And He's the one that sees the end of it all, where we may never know how the ending of certain things that happen to us are. So it's in those moments of hurt, those moments of loss and sorrow, even in those moments of guilt, where we don't have to understand God's grace and His love and His mercy. We don't have to understand the big picture or how the story ends. Because God works all things for good. So right now we're going to sing a song about the King of our heart and how He reigns over everything. And the part of the song that I love is the mantra over and over of you are good, you are good, you are good. Because sometimes that's what you need to say in order to get through something. Whether you believe it at the beginning or not, God is good. And in those moments, He's all we have to turn to. So right now, let's sing this out as our declaration today of you are good, God, you are good. And you're never, ever, ever going to let us down. You'll never turn your back on us. Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. 'Cause you are
never gonna let me down. You're 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 never gonna let me
Now, if this is your first time and you're like, wow, that was a lot in one song, here's what I'm going to tell you is, at our church, what we believe is that God loves you so much, and we're going to talk about this here in a little bit, but God loves you unconditionally. God is pursuing your heart, and even in the brokenness, even in the suffering, even in the parts of the human experience that are very difficult for us, what we believe is that we can find God in all of those places. The life of Jesus models that. The people that follow Jesus closely, they modeled that for us. And then for us, no matter where you are, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what you've done in the past, what you're currently doing, no matter what kind of difficulty your life may be facing, we believe that it's in those moments that we find hope, and that hope comes through Jesus. So thanks so much for singing with us. You can go ahead and have a seat. We're so glad that you're here. For those of you who don't know, my name is Patrick, and I'm the pastor here, and we're just so thankful you decided to join us today. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and invite our ushers to move forward. We're going to receive our offering, and I just want to say thank you so much to all of you who give and you're a part of what's happening here. Well, really, when it comes to our church, we're able to do so many things, both here locally and then in Michigan as a whole, but really globally as well, because people just like you give, and you give sacrificially, and you're a part of that. So we just want to say thanks so much for doing that. The other thing I want to tell you, too, is I know Greg mentioned this a few minutes ago, but for us, giving is a part of being engaged. Giving is a part of, just being a part of what God is doing and releasing things in your heart. The other piece of this is volunteering and just really being a part of what God's doing here in our community. And we've said from the day one, since we launched here back in September as Kensington, we said that we wanted to be for Traverse City, that we wanted to be a church that has come together for the city. And one of the ways that we do that is through Safe Harbor. And so I know Greg gave you some details about that. Jamie's going to be out in the lobby today to connect with you. But here's my goal for our church, and here's what we're hoping for with you, is we're really looking for about 150 volunteers to show up for Safe Harbor this year. And so I would say this, I know a lot of you give, you're a part of our church that way, but some of you haven't taken that next step to volunteer, and Safe Harbor is a wonderful way to do that. You can do it with you can do it as a couple, you can do it as a whole family as well. There's a lot of different areas that you can get involved. But I would just encourage you today, if you want to be a part of that, just to go out to the lobby and let Jamie know, and then you can be a part of that coming up in February. Now, I also wanted to do one other thing real quick. So I want to introduce you real quick. This is Megan. Everybody say, hey, Megan. Yeah, she did a great job. Megan is singing with us today for the first time. She's incredible, so we're so excited to have her. And then I want to introduce you to one other person. Everybody say, hey, Keaton. Yeah, Keaton is also playing guitar. Now, here's what's so cool about Keaton. How old are you again? You were 18. Weird. 18 years old, and his glasses are infinitely cooler than mine, but I'm not jealous. I'm past it. And so I want to tell you a quick story. Keaton has started playing with us. He does a phenomenal job. He actually let us know, like, hey, I play guitar, and I know this sounds bad. Don't judge me. When 18-year-olds are like, hey, I play guitar, I'm like, well, okay. you know? And so Ryan met with him. I don't know if you know this. Ryan filmed a video of Keaton playing and sent it to me. He goes, oh my gosh. He's incredible and just does a phenomenal job. So we're so excited that he's playing. But part of the reason I want to tell you about Keaton is how many of you have been to one of our render services? Anybody come to render? Yeah? All right. So here's what's fun about render. We did a render service on Christmas Eve, 11 p.m. And Keaton and his family all came, and his sister came with her boyfriend. And then right after the service, because the talk was so good, right, he walks out into our parking lot and proposes to Keaton's sister. So Casey and Madison got engaged right after one of our render services. So we're so excited about that. They were with us at the 9 o'clock, and I totally embarrassed them. They were sitting right where you did, and it was fantastic. But we're just so excited about that too. So today what we're doing is we're kicking off a brand new series called Crave, and we're going to be talking about like appetites that you have, cravings that we all have in our lives, and the benefit of those, and then really some of the difficulty that those can bring as well. And so to get us thinking along those lines, our church actually wrote a song that's connected to what we're going to be doing today. And so I want to invite Andy to come up. Andy's going to be singing this song. I'd love for you to pay attention to the words. They're going to be right back here on the screen. But this is an original song that we wrote that connects to what we're going to be talking about today. Let's watch this.
For your attention, I just want to be known. I'd do anything just to be told you're perfect, you're beautiful. I'm striving to be unforgettable. The voice I hear the loudest says you're forgotten. Strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worthless. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm playing by the rules of love, it's my condition. Perfectionistic addiction. Hope you don't see through my walls. I'm trying to be unforgettable. The voice I hear the loudest says you are forgotten. I strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worth it. Am I worth it? I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. Striving for your love, I'm striving to be loved. I'm dying for your love, I'm dying to be loved. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, and I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. Crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval. I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved. I'm striving for your love, I'm striving to be loved. I'm dying for your love, dying to be loved. The voice I hear the loudest says you are forgotten. I strive to prove I'm worth it, so I'm not worthless. And I crave your approval, and I crave for survival, and I crave your approval, 'cause I'm fighting for your love, I'm fighting to be loved.
Now, here's why I love that song so much. Because whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, whether you're, 20-something or you're 80-something, whether you're a guy, girl, whether you're a CEO or you're an intern, the thing about that song is that it hits deeply at the heart of every single one of us, no matter where we are on any of those spectrums. And the reason that it hits us so hard is because every single one of us, at some point or another, have discovered that we have a craving or we have an appetite for approval. That at some point along the way, whether you're a kindergartner or you're 55 years old, all of us, at some point or another, crave the approval of somebody else. And the reason that we crave approval is because there's something kind of deeply rooted inside of all of us that is connected to what we're going to talk about today for a few minutes, and that's this. It's all connected to appetites that we have, right? This series is based off the idea that you have appetites or you have desires in your heart and in your life that we're constantly sort of reaching for. Now, just so we're all on the same page, how many of you have an appetite for chocolate? Anybody have an appetite all the time? If you're not raising your hand, I'm judging. I do not understand. I'm just kidding. There's this appetite for chocolate. Now, fellas, let me ask you this. How many of us have an appetite for bacon? Anybody out there bacon lovers? How many of you had bacon this morning? How many of you wish you had bacon this morning? Yeah, I'm with you, right? We have these appetites. And the thing about appetites is that appetites really only know one word. And you know this if you've ever had bacon. It only requires one word, and the one word is this. It wants more, right? So real quick, how many of you have ever had too much bacon? That's right. That's right. You haven't. Because you just don't. The appetites inside of us really only know one word, and the word that they know is more. There's this thing inside of us that's constantly grasping, constantly wanting more. Now, when it comes to food, we know that this is true. But when it comes to the food, and you've experienced this, as well, when it comes to appetite, we can say this, that appetites will ultimately control us if we don't learn to control them. Now, I've discovered that with chocolate at times, right? There's something where we just understand that if we don't manage our appetites well, if we don't acknowledge the good appetites we have and the negative appetites that we have, then all of a sudden it leads us to a place in our lives where we don't want to be. And so the appetite, obviously, that we're going to be talking about today is this appetite of approval. And I think that's an appetite that, again, all of us have at some point. Now, for me, I didn't really discover this appetite for approval, or at least I didn't put words to it, until I was pretty young. I discovered it in 6th grade, because I was so bad at math. I had a math teacher that I was constantly trying to impress and to, I wanted her approval because I was so bad at it. But then when I got to high school, my senior year of high school, I had the opportunity to go to a school that teaches jazz guitar, right? And the way that it works is that about half the time that I would be in school that day, I would go to regular classes, and then the second half, I would get to go to this jazz school. So I'd drive downtown in the middle of nowhere, and there were about 25 of us that would go to this school, and they taught jazz guitar at the school that I was at. Now, what's so interesting about it is I grew up in a musical home. My mom actually made a living teaching people how to play piano by ear, and so I always just grew up around learning how to play music by ear. And so what I would do is so bad. I don't recommend this. But I got to the school, and they wanted to teach us how to read sheet music, which I thought that would be a great thing if I could, actually read, sheet music, but I couldn't. So I got several months in to the program, and what I would do is I would memorize the pieces that they would give, and I could hear it enough to actually play it. And so one day, my professor, he started picking up on the fact that I wasn't able to read music very well, and my girlfriend was also in the class. And so the way that this worked is he got really, really, really angry about it. You ever seen a teacher get really, really angry? And so what he does is he calls me up to the front of the class, and he removes the piece of paper that I memorized, and he gives me a piece of music that I hadn't memorized. And he goes, well, play that. And I was like, I can't really play that. So he calls my girlfriend up. He said, well, let's just teach you how to do it. So he wanted to teach me a lesson. So he brings my girlfriend up, gives her a pencil, right? He slows the speed down to a quarter of the speed. And in front of the whole class, he goes, I'm going to have her point to each note at a quarter of the speed, and then you're going to have to sight read that. And I sat there mortified. And the way that he would do things is he would do things like that to people all the time, and it felt so unhealthy, and it felt so weird, and it was that's not how it should be. But I remember sitting there with my guitar, with my girlfriend pointing note for note, and in my head saying words that I probably shouldn't have been thinking, right? I'm doing all of those kinds of things. I'm so embarrassed, I'm so angry, and I'm doing it. But there was something inside of me that had this unhealthy desire for his approval. And so for the rest of the year, I would do that. I would constantly be looking for his approval and trying to get it. Now, that was a really tough thing for me. Actually, that stuck with me. A lot of times when you're in middle school or high school, we talk about that kind of need for approval. We talk about it in terms of peer pressure. And you think that once you graduate high school, you don't really have that anymore. But I experienced that over and over and over again in my life. And one of the times was actually fairly recent. So again, a lot of you know the story, but I was 27 years old when we felt like God began to nudge us to come to Traverse City, Michigan. And so we found out about it. And I've said this before, but we looked at a map to figure out where Traverse City was because I didn't know. And I was like, oh, that's north of Canada. How does that work? I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that was there. And what is Michigan? So we're having this whole conversation. And so we decided to come up. And so we brought in all these consultants. Some of you know the story. This place was led, he's actually right over there, by Nick Toomey. It was founded by Nick. He's an amazing leader, an incredible speaker. And Nick, I think I can say this out loud, was about twice my age at the time. Maybe a little bit less, but that hurts. But he looks like he's 35, right? That's right. Silver Fox, though. I love it. Yeah. So anyway, And so the consultants would come to me and they say, hey, I just want you to know that there are going to be people who, leave the church. I'm like, I'm fairly thick-skinned. There are going to be people who don't like you. I'm like, well, that's, Tuesday. That's just what it is. There are times that we do that, And then they said this. I thought this was interesting. They said, there are going to be people who don't like you just because you're not Nick. And I was like, well, I'll be fine. And so what would happen is, so when we kind of launched and we started doing things, every once in a while I'd get an email or a phone call or somebody drop a note in there and they'd talk theology, which I actually love talking about. So when people, want to have a theology conversation, I'm like, well, that's great. Let's talk about it. That's what I do for fun. Let's do that. So we'd do that sort of thing. None of those bothered me. They really didn't get under my skin. And they're about 6 months into all of this. I gave a message one day, and, there are times I'll speak, and I'm like, that went pretty well. I felt good. There are times I'll speak, I'm like, I just want to go sleep. It was just not good. And then there are times where, it's kind of in the middle. So this one, I walked off the stage, I felt like that was score. That was a good day, I think I made my wife cry that day. I was like, that's great, So I felt good. And then I get home to an email. And, this person didn't want to talk theology. They didn't want to talk about anything. What they wanted to talk about, I actually brought them. What they wanted to talk about was my socks. I'm not kidding. And so let me tell you, the way that this works for me is I've always been the guy. I've just been a tube sock and tennis shoe kind of guy. New Balances, we talked about that last week. I think we covered that ground. And so I think for me, I wore tube socks that day, and they were so angry. So I got this 7 paragraph email about why I shouldn't wear tube socks on stage. And I think my wife would probably agree with that, but I just don't that's just what I did, And I did this. Now, here's what's so fascinating about that. Out of the emails that we got and the phone calls that we got, the whole deal, out of all of that, the only one that got under my skin was about my socks. And I've had these since 8th grade, I've just that's just me. Now, here's what's so fascinating about it. And it's funny because, there's socks and that sort of thing. But I remember the week or two after that, every time I'd sit on the stool, because I sit on the stool or whatever, you could see my socks. I would feel a little bit nervous about it, feel a little bit angsty. And then if you fast forward a little bit, we went on a staff retreat. And several months into it, Greg Ruby, who you saw earlier, he's our campus director. We're at Walmart one night, which is fun. Our staff just hung out at Walmart on a staff retreat. And he goes, hey, you know what you should do is you need black socks. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll kill you. You know what I mean? What is that? And it's not even about the socks. And I got so upset and angry and frustrated. How are you not going to like what's wrong with my socks? And then I bought some. But, now I only wear black socks. And this whole thing, though, started, and I started getting so insecure, not about teaching, not about, the things that, I was so much saying, not really about all that, because I love the criticism, and I love, talking about it and learning and growing. I got so insecure about my socks. And I got to thinking, what kind of person starts thinking about their socks when they're speaking on stage? And it began to hit me that there was something deeply rooted inside of me that was craving approval from people and wanted you not only to like me, there's all that, but think that, that I was a good dresser or something. I don't know. And I don't even shop for myself. I don't even go look for clothes. But there was something in me that got insecure about that because I was craving approval from people about socks. Now, we do that in so many areas of our lives. You probably don't do that with socks. You probably do it with other areas. Some people think of it like this. Some people are insecure about their body, right? And they go work out all the time, which is okay. I think you should work out. I think you should take care of your body. We're actually going to talk about that. But if you look like this, I think you're good. I think you've got it down. I think you're doing a good job. Nobody's judging you. Maybe a little bit, that sort of thing. Like, you're good, you know what I mean? But some people go to the gym, and they don't go to the gym to be healthy. They go to the gym because they want other people to look at them and go, wow, have you been working out? They want that. And there's this craving for approval in some of those areas. Now, we live in a selfie kind of culture, right? Everybody's taking selfies. Selfies aren't bad. You got Snapchat. You make your face look like a puppy. That's all good things. But then there becomes a moment, though, and you know this, when people start to like your post, and all of a sudden something begins to be released in your brain over and over and over again with every single like, you're just like, well, they love me, And then you post a picture of your kid, not that I ever do that. You post a picture of your kid, and then they like it, they're like, well. And then here's where it gets really weird, but you're a better person than me, so you never think this. It's like, I posted a picture of my kid, I got 70 likes. I posted a picture of me doing something, I got 12, Like, what does that mean about me? All right, and the other one is this. I think this one's always fun. Like, when you think about your credit card, how many of you, come on, be honest, you're in church. Have you ever bought something less about the fact that you wanted or needed it, but because you wanted other people to know you had it? Has anybody ever done that? Come on, be honest. I've done that. You won't raise your hand. Well, maybe you will. Anybody? We just won't do that. Yeah, so I've done that all the time. You see people driving cars, and you're like, I love that you have that. Some people buy cars. It's always fun. They'll buy cars or lease cars just so their neighbor knows they can, And there's this thing in our hearts where we want this status thing to kind of happen. The other one is this. We do this all the time when it comes to relationships. Like, you've been dating and dating and dating, and then finally you found the perfect person, and you want everybody to know it, right? And so what happens in this relationship is you want everybody to know you found the perfect person, but what you're really doing is you are seeking the approval of the other person over and over and over and over again. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when it begins to be difficult is when that appetite begins to get out of whack. Now, my favorite one is I played sports before I played that. And we used to travel a lot, play football, basketball, baseball. We'd travel, and we'd always see, the parents who are a little bit too into the game. You ever seen this? And here's what happens. This is always fun. Is you begin to seek approval from other people based off of the performance of your kid. We all know them, right? And all of a sudden, it's like the performance, like your kid scored a touchdown, and you watch the dad, and you think, he scored the touchdown, right? The dad's doing the hype. You're like, what's happening? You're freaking out about this. And it's so fascinating because you're looking for approval from other people through your kids. Now, we all crave this approval idea. Every single one of us craves approval. And again, there are parts of approval that are good, but there are parts of it that can be bad. And Rick Warren, who's a pastor out in California, he writes about this college student that had written him about this idea of approval. There's this one line in this paragraph that I thought was so powerful that I want to share with you. And so this is a college student writing to Rick Warren, and the college student said this. I'm tired of saying yes to people just because I'm afraid to say no. I'm tired of caring too much about what other people think about me, and I'm tired of being manipulated and used, but in many ways, it's my fault. And then the second paragraph says this. Sometimes I feel that I don't even know who I am. I'm a collection of the expectations of others. So powerful. Because if we were really honest, when you go to work, you have an expectation from your boss, and you want approval so you can feel significant. And there's something inside of us, for those of us who are married, or those of us who are dating, or some of us who want to do that sort of thing. There's that whole relational dynamic where you're seeking the approval of somebody else so that they can validate that you're enough to be loved. And I think my question that we really want to wrestle with a little bit today is this. What would it take for you to feel significant? Or let me put it this way. What would it take for you to feel fully and finally significant? What would it take for you to feel fully and finally adequate? And what would it take for you to feel fully and finally enough? What would that take? How many likes on Instagram would that take from you? How many times of your wife saying, you are good looking, is that going to take for you? How many people are you going to need to date? How many promotions will you need to get? At what position will you finally feel like you have enough control and you're significant enough? At what point will you get that kind of approval? Now, there's a guy who is very near and dear to my heart because I met with him several times, and he's just such a brilliant, brilliant guy. His name is Jack Wilson. Jack is kind of like our staff counselor, and then he does so many other things. But he has such an interesting life because he was actually a sports counselor, so he would help athletes, professional athletes, kind of get through some of their things. And then, and so for a while, he was even a PGA Tour caddy for a golfer, which is so funny because he knows a lot about golf, but at the same time, he was really there to help this guy think through and process some of this. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted you to hear from an expert. I wanted you to hear from an expert who's going to talk about the physiological side of this a little bit, and then we're going to come back and talk about some of the spiritual components of it as well. But I wanted you to hear from Jack for just a couple of minutes on what this looks like to crave approval and to chase after that. So let's watch this video together.
So, Jack, we're talking about cravings, addictions in this series. How would you define that? I know you deal with this kind of stuff all the time in your own life.
Sure.
But obviously counseling people. How would you define a craving that a person can't say no to?
Well, a craving is both psychological and physiological. And when we get, whether it's craving for chocolate or craving for alcohol or craving for a controlled substance, we actually have kind of a physiological change, in the whole mind-body system. And thinking about that, visualizing it. You've heard me say that 24 hours a day, we're constantly talking to ourselves, both in words and in pictures. And when we have cravings, those show up as pictures in our brain, and a picture is worth what? 1,000 words, right? So when we picture the object of our desire, or at some point perhaps the object of our addiction, then it basically overpowers the whole system. And makes us think about it in a compulsive. You can almost use compulsive and craving sort of as synonyms.
Now, how do I know, or how does a person know when a craving is good and when it gets dangerous?
Whenever a craving interferes with our ability to lead a normal, healthy, relationship-centered life, then it's something we really ought to be giving some serious thought to.
So let's say week 1 of this series, I struggle with your approval and everybody's approval. Right. How can I test that to see if it's really determining how I feel?
Okay. If you're struggling with approval, then there's a variety of different things that you want to do, but you want to begin having an attitude change, okay? Because approval is an attitude. And attitudes are incredibly powerful, okay? So if you have an attitude that I need somebody's approval, then start thinking differently, start visualizing differently. But in that process, start kind of analyzing, where did this come from? I'm really big on personality types and things like that, and certain personality types are more likely to care about other people's attitudes. So we want to start there. Some people grew up in dysfunctional families, and they were not allowed to be who they really are. So they become very concerned about approval because they were trying to fake it without even knowing they were faking it, because that was their environment. But they've not been allowed to express who they truly are. So you start thinking in terms of kind of in the existential sense, who am I? And if you grew up in a dysfunctional family that did not allow you to develop by trying things out, by making mistakes, by talking honestly about your emotions, then you're going to have to go through some of that.
I love what Jack's talking about, because he's talking about shifting your mindset, shifting the way that you think about things, and really paying attention to your heart. Like, how does my attitude really connect with approval? How do I make sure that I'm moving in the direction that I need to? And so the writers in the New Testament actually talk about this kind of idea quite a bit. They talk about the appetites that we have. They talk about the struggles that we all face. And one of the writers who talks about it specifically is a guy named Paul. And I think Paul's writing on this is so fascinating because of who Paul was. Paul is a guy who was going in one direction. He meets Jesus. His life just completely shifts and changes into a different direction. Paul ended up planting churches all over the ancient world. In fact, if you're here and you're not Jewish, right, you probably came to faith in some ways. We can connect it back to Paul, because Paul took the message of the gospel to all people in a lot of ways. And so Paul is a fascinating writer to look at on this, because by all accounts, Paul would be kind of viewed as somebody who should have it together. He planted churches all over the place. He's kind of like this, figure in Christendom. I mean, he's just a big deal. But when Paul writes about himself, there are times where Paul gets so vulnerable about his own struggle, and he gets so vulnerable about the forces at work in his mind and his heart, that in some ways it stops us in our tracks and causes us to look inward. And so one of these passages is in a letter that he wrote to Rome, or the churches in Rome, and he's writing in Romans chapter 7, and here's what he says. He says, "So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. Now, I want you to kind of think about how he talks about this idea. He says this, for in my inner being, so inside of me, these appetites, these thoughts, these, mind things that I have going on, in my inner being, I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work within me. I notice that there are two appetites. There are two desires. There are two directions that are both pulling almost at the same time. And I desire both. And then he goes on and says this. He says, they're waging war against the law of my mind and making me a, what's that word? Prisoner. They're making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. Now I love this, the waging war part. He could have used any kind of imagery that he wanted to, but the way that he talks about these two appetites is almost in this violent and aggressive way, which he'll continue on. There are these two appetites, waging war in my mind and in my heart and in my soul. Now, I grew up in the types of churches that would have said, well, if you just prayed more, then it would have gone away. That you shouldn't have this struggle. But I'm like, well, Paul, he prayed, like he had that. And that's important. But at the same time, it's not a switch that you turn on and off. That Paul begins to talk about things that are connected to this that we have to do. That we have this part of us that we need to be connected to this idea as well. So he's talking about being a prisoner. He's talking about being a slave in his mind. And again, he's getting after this idea that both appetites are craving more. And he goes on and says this. He says, what a wretched man I am. Now, I love this. Half the New Testament was written by Paul. Planting churches all over the ancient world. And he goes, what a wretched man I am. What a sinner I am. He acknowledges the appetites and the issues and the problems and the suffering. It's connected to his heart. And then he asks a question that I think is foundational for every single one of us in the room. Whether a follower of Jesus or not, he says this. He says, who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? And the question under the question, I think, is this. Is freedom possible? That if I am constantly struggling with this war between the two appetites, that if inside of me there is this desire for both, is freedom possible? Who will rescue me, back to the violence, who will rescue me from this body that is subject to the death? And then he gives the answer. He says this, thanks be to God, who delivers me, and then there's the answer to the problem, through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin. Now here's the beautiful part about Paul's writings in the New Testament. As you begin to read through this, what you discover is that Paul believes that freedom is possible through Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. And there's no amount of self-help books, there's no amount of steps, there's no amount of any of that where you really find what you need. Freedom is possible, but freedom is possible only through Jesus Christ. In fact, in other writings that he's going to teach on things that go, look, freedom is yours. Why won't you take the freedom that is yours? That if you are a son or a daughter of God, if you are a follower of Jesus, if you have been adopted into the kingdom by which Jesus came to establish, freedom is yours. And the underlying idea is take your freedom. That every chain that had held you is broken. You are no longer a captive. Take your freedom. And then he gives us our part of the equation, which I think is so incredible the way he says this. He says, those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what the nature desires. Here's our part. That even those who are followers of Jesus, who are held captive, have their minds set on what the nature desires, or what that internal nature desires, or that appetite desires. Their mind is fixed on the appetites that are leading them away. Even though the power of freedom is theirs, and he goes on and says this. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. Paul's like, look, freedom is yours. Because Jesus came and he died on the cross and he rose from the grave. He took all of our sin on himself, all of our shame on himself, and he overcame all of it. Freedom is yours. So why would you spend your life focusing on the appetites that are going to pull you away from who you are? Because Jesus looks at you and says, son or daughter of God. Because Jesus looks at you and says, you have freedom. Because Jesus looks at you and says, you are mine. Why would you allow yourself to focus on the appetite that's pulling you away when you have the opportunity to focus on the appetite inside of you who's pulling you closer and closer to God's plan for your life? In fact, you could even ask it this way. Who are you going to give control to? Will you give control over and submission over to the Spirit of God, that appetite pulling you in the direction you need to? Or will you, through your mind and your thoughts and the things that you dwell on, give yourself to an appetite that's going to lead you somewhere you never wanted to go? Then Paul says this. The mind of sinful man is death. But the mind, don't miss this, the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. It's not you striving to be good enough. It's not you trying to get God's approval. It's not you trying to get the approval of everybody else. It's not you being good enough. It's you surrendering control of your life over, handing your thoughts over, handing your mind over, handing your heart and emotions and the deepest part of your human existence, being the soul, over to God. Saying, take all of my brokenness. I submit to you. My question for us in the room is this. Are you living for the approval of God? Are you living your life trying to get in good with God, to be good enough, or for the approval of others, trying to be good enough for others so they look at you in the ways that you want? Or are you living from the approval of God? I don't want you to miss this, because they seem like similar words, but those of us who constantly live our lives looking for the approval of others, even trying to get in with the approval of God, is ignoring the truth that the freedom is yours. That as a follower of Jesus, freedom is yours. And will you come to God with submission and say, here's my past and here's my brokenness and here's the things that I've kind of looked at in myself, but God, here's all of that. I give you control of my heart and my mind and my soul. Return for the freedom that you've already given me that's waiting on me. Or will you allow yourself to continually be focused on the appetites that lead you away from God's best for your life? Now, I wanted you to hear this in the words of somebody who's really walked this road. Because some of you, when we start talking about approval, if you're honest, your heart kind of gets cracked open a little bit because you have stories like I have stories, but your stories may be more painful. Or you have stories like I have stories about your father. You have stories like I have stories about people who said a thing, and you can still quote the thing that they said. And it's caused you to spiral into this need for approval from other people. But I wanted you to hear from somebody who had that kind of past and those kinds of appetites and those kinds of struggle, but decided to grasp at the freedom that was hers and choose to view her life as who she was as a child of God. Her name is Judy. Let's watch her story together.
When I was young, I loved my mom. She was just a gorgeous, really talented person, just beautiful. She didn't have any self-worth. She wasn't a Christian and had already been left from one husband. This was her second marriage. And I think she knew my dad was having affairs, and she just did whatever it took. She was a June Cleaver during the day and a Marilyn Monroe at night. I watched that in her life, and I thought, well, if it worked for her, I guess the whole time until I got married, I just thought that's what I would have to do. Eventually, I started getting interested in boys. I started dressing kind of seductively, and I didn't think I could get approval just for who I was. When I was 15, Johnny came into my life. He was everything I ever wanted. I knew the minute I met him that I would never let him go. It wasn't even 6 months. We were having sex. And a lot of times, if he would want to take me home early or anything, that's how I would keep him. One night I came home after being out late, in Johnny's car, and my father was up. He had been drinking, and he called me a slut. I guess I thought that if anybody could spot one, he could, because of the way his life was. And I never got his approval, I guess. Or maybe I did. I don't know. I thought women were supposed to be like that. And that's all they were good for, because that's the way he treated my mom. And that's the picture I had of myself. Eventually, Johnny and I did get married. I remember Johnny always saying to me, all I want from you is I want you to look good, smell good, and take care of the children. That's all I ever thought about was how I looked. And if he would even come home for lunch and I didn't have my makeup on or my lipstick on or something, he would say, are you sick? Don't you feel good? I couldn't really be myself. I could never be myself. I always had to wear a mask. I didn't feel like I could ever just be who I was. I found a Playboy magazine under the mattress. I got really mad, very angry. I felt very rejected, and I knew I had competition. One night, I had a candlelight dinner all set for him. The kids were tucked in bed, and he called and said he wouldn't be home because he had some other things that he had to do. By the time he got home, I was so angry. I went out, and I had an affair. Just a one-time affair. I couldn't believe that I had done that. I came home and I told him, hoping that he would show some kind of concern, but he didn't. He let me know that he really didn't care. About 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant, and then we were really scared. I knew that it wasn't my husband's baby. I went and had an abortion. And one of the reasons I had the abortion was so that nobody would know what I did, that I had been unfaithful. I wanted to hide it. I didn't want my children ever to know that I wasn't the perfect mother, a perfect wife. I decided one night that I couldn't live with myself anymore for what I'd done. So I was standing in the bathroom and considering taking my life, and the phone rang at 3 in the morning. It was my twin sister. What she told me was that an angel woke her up and said to call me because I was in trouble. So I remember hanging up the phone, going in my living room, and praying to God, if you're real, please show me. So 3 weeks later, we went to a Billy Graham crusade. It was like he knew my story. There were 75,000 people there. And the first scripture he quoted was about the adulterous woman. And I remember him saying that Isaiah 1:18 said that even though your sins are red as scarlet, that he would wash you as white as wool, that he would forgive you. It was news I never knew. I had no idea that God was like that. I thought God was like my dad, that he was angry all the time, and I should be scared of him. I went to the altar and asked Jesus into my heart, because that's what I wanted. I wanted forgiveness. He said I could be made brand new. I remember going home, and I saw myself as a completely different person. I was just totally free to be who I wanted to be, and it wouldn't matter who got mad at me if I didn't, act the way they wanted me to act. All that mattered is that what God thought of me. Even though I knew mercy and grace from God, I still didn't have that mercy and grace for Johnny. I put a lot of blame on him for my actions. He visited a church that I was attending, and again, the evangelist was preaching his story, and he got saved. I saw a change in Johnny that was incredible. After the Billy Graham crusade, I found out that I was pregnant. I just couldn't believe that God would would trust me to be a mom again after what I'd done, that he would really trust me. So for the next 9 months, I was scared to death. So the day came when I went to the hospital and delivered the baby. And the nurses and the doctors kept looking at me saying, Judy, look at your baby. He's just a beautiful baby boy. And I didn't want to look because of that fear of punishment. And I finally looked at my child, John Dempsey Stoll. And that's when I really saw mercy and grace. I couldn't believe it, that God would give me this beautiful baby. He gave me beauty for ashes. I just thank God every day.
You know, in a crowd the size that we have in here, and, you know, we had another service as well, the likelihood of some of us in the room who have experienced that kind of brokenness and pain is very real. Some of you walked in here and nobody in this room knows your whole story. No one in this room knows the baggage that you've carried. No one in this room knows the sin that you've had in the past. No one in this room knows what you're even currently doing. Your spouse may not even know. And what you've done is you've allowed yourself, as Paul's talking about, to focus on appetites that have led you down a path that you never intended to go on, the path that you never wanted to experience, and you've been craving approval for other people for as long as you can remember. Now, the danger in this, I think, isn't even the path that you're on, and it's not even the appetite that you have. I think the danger in it is that some of you have allowed yourself to be labeled by your sin, to be labeled by the sin that someone else committed that affected your life. Some of you have been allowed yourself to be labeled by the way you view yourself, or the lack of approval that you felt, or the inadequacy that you live with. And I think the deeper heart problem with that is that you've allowed yourself to be labeled by someone who can't label you. You can't label you. The other people really can't label you. You've allowed that label into your heart and your life. The only one that can label you, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, the only one that labels us is the one who designed us. It's Jesus when he came and he died on the cross and he rose from the grave and he overwhelmed sin. And he overpowered the forces and effects of sin in our lives. That you've accepted a label that said you're not enough, or that you're not significant. You're inadequate. And the whole time, Jesus is looking at you saying, no. That's just a chain that you've allowed to be attached to yourself that's broken already. Take it off. Because the one who designed me is the only one that can define me. The one who had a plan for you before you were ever born. The one who knew all about you, who knows your thoughts and the moments when you've struggled and had the most pain and done the most terrible things, and still pursued you and ran after you. He says you're enough. He says you're mine. And the beautiful part about the writings of the New Testament, the beautiful part about the people who knew Jesus, is he ran to the brokenness and he ran to the suffering and he said, come to me, you're enough. Come to me, you are mine. And the God of the universe knows the whole universe, but at the same time knows every hair on your head and says, I love you with an unconditional and never-ending love. Come to me. Now, typically we give like practical application steps, that sort of thing, and those are important. But to kick off the series, what I want you to know are 3 statements to shape your thinking on this. And it's easy just to read them on the screen, and it's easy just to pass this moment by, but some of you, I want you to look at every single word and let it grip your heart. first one is this: that you are not a slave to the approval of other people. You're not a slave to the approval of your father. You're not a slave to the approval of your boss. You're not a slave to the approval of your spouse. You're not a slave to the approval of every mommy blog who tells you you're not enough. You're not a slave to other people who judge you. You're not a slave to the approval of other people. You're not. Second one is this: you are enough to receive unconditional love. You're enough. And the reason that you're enough is because Jesus took all of that on himself. You are enough to receive unconditional love. You're enough for the God of the universe to see only you and say, I love you in your mind. And the last one is this, and some of us have heard this since the time we were 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, but we've never heard it and let it take root in our heart and our mind. And I feel like, I know this sounds odd, if every person in this room understood this and every person in Traverse City understood this, I wouldn't have a job. I'd do something else. Because it's that powerful of a truth when you really let it sink in and take root, and that's this: that you are a child of God. Paul writes about adoption. Paul writes about co-heirs with Christ. That your past matters, but it doesn't dictate the fact that you're a child of God. And that your current sin matters, but it doesn't dictate the fact that you are a child of God. And that you have the capacity, and I have the capacity, to reach out and accept the freedom that only comes through Christ. And to remind ourselves that because we are sons and daughters of the God of the universe, we are enough because he says we're enough. So the question for us is, will you live for the approval of God, or will you live from it? Will you be chasing after it, or will you decide that I'm going to live from it and allow my life to be wrapped into that? Now, we're going to end with a song that's one of my favorite songs, and it's one of my favorite songs because the lyrics, I think, just point so deeply to the heart of who God is and what he wants for us. But I was thinking, how do we illustrate this song? And so we picked this song early in the week, and then I think it was 2 nights ago, maybe last night, Emily was here working, I was here, and our little boy, he's like 20 months old, was here. I should know that off the top of my head. And I'm watching, we're actually in that room back there, and I'm watching a message on TV, and he's kind of playing around on the floor. 20 months old, and he walks up to me, and he has this thing now where he takes both hands and grabs my face and turns my face to him and pulls me close, right? So I'm like, oh, that's cute, And as I'm looking at him, he's done. He wraps his arm around mine, he puts his head on my shoulder, and now we're watching the preacher together, And so after a few seconds, I'm like, well, this is over. This is great. Oh, I'm going to watch again, So I'm watching, and not 5 seconds go by. And he gets a little bit more frustrated this time, like he could beat me up. I think he thinks that. And then he looks at me, and he grabs my face again, and he turns it, and he pulls it close, and he stares at me for a second. Because at 20 months old, he already desires approval. And he's looking for approval from me. And at 30 years old, I know that I will never be able to give him the approval that he needs. I will never have enough attention. I will never have enough words. I will never be able to satisfy fully and finally that desire. But as I thought about that, the peace that comes over me in that moment is knowing there is a heavenly Father who is already looking. That he doesn't have to grab the face of God and pull it close and pull it in. That God is already looking and he sees and he's already present. That God isn't waiting for us to grab his face and pull it close. He's simply asking us to open our eyes and see that he's been there the whole time. And that he says that we're enough and that we're adequate. And that we can experience unconditional love that only comes through him. The song that we're going to end with, the song called Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. And the verse of this, which I never read before this week, this particular verse, it says, "O soul, are you weary and troubled? No light in the darkness you see. There's light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. And the part that we're going to sing today, and I'm going to ask you to sing, every single one of us over the next few minutes. We're going to sing this together. One massive choir singing this. It says this. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and stand, and I want to pray over you, and I want to pray over us, and then Annie and Megan are going to come. They're going to lead us in this song, and we're going to sing a song called No Longer Slaves. And over these next few minutes, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you're in this room and you're a follower of Jesus, you call Kensington home, here's what I'm going to ask you to do for the next couple minutes. I'm going to ask you just to kind of be a participant in this, and really just as one choir, even if you're a bad singers in the room, we'll be in this together, right? But I'm going to ask you to sing this out because I think there's something sacred about a group of people singing that kind of truth. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's okay if you don't want to sing, but I'm going to ask you just to pay attention so closely as these words come by and to the moment that's about to happen. And pay attention to that crack in your heart that I feel like is probably open and what that means for you. So let me pray, and then we'll sing this together. Father, I know every single one of us probably deal with this approval thing at some level, especially me. God, it's so easy to just move so quickly through life and not deal with this, and to ignore the appetites that we have and to pursue appetites that we shouldn't, specifically on approval. But God, I pray for every single one of us in the room, and I ask that over these next few moments that you would solidify this in our heart. For those of us who have been living to try to get your approval or living for your approval, God, I ask that you would just help us to stop and just turn and face you and know that you're there. The person in the room who's been resisting you for a long time, and they came today, and they came with all their walls, and they came with all of their reasons why they shouldn't, and they came with all of their angst. They've discovered over the last several minutes that some of that's been broken down. God, I just ask that in these moments you would help them to be so open to what you might say to them and what you might want to do. And God, I ask for all of us that we would learn to live from your approval, from your love, and from who you've called us to be, from the label that you've given us. And you would allow us to experience the freedom that comes from that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face.
unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. Let's declare that. Sing no longer. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I am surrounded by the arms of the Father. I am surrounded by songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage. We're the sons and the daughters. Let us sing our freedom. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear, for I am a child of God.
So we know that a day like this hits everybody a little bit differently. And so what I wanted to do is I did want to give you one practical kind of action step this week. Some of you, you're like, that's me. It's like, how did you know you're talking directly to me? Like one of those things. And here's what I would tell you. I think one of the best things that you could do is, as Paul talks about shifting our mindsets and making sure we're focused on the right things, you need to tell yourself what we talked about today over and over and over and over again. And so we're going to be posting those 3 points online. You can grab them there if you want. But I think what you could do is you could take those 3 points, or maybe take one of them or two of them, whatever really applies to you, write it on a note card and put it somewhere where you're going to see it this week. So you need to have that in your car. You need to have that on your mirror. So you need to have that at the office, like next to a picture of your boss, whatever that is, I might get weird, but something, where you just remind yourself. And I think it's that idea that I am a child of God. I'm going to live from his approval and not just for it. And so for others of you, you're like, hey, I'd love to talk to somebody today. And so we have a prayer team that's going to be up here in front. We'd love to connect with you, love to talk to you, love to pray with you, whatever's going on in your life from there. And the last thing I want to tell you about, if it's your first time and you're like, I want more information, like this is fun, or this has been a cool environment, but I'd like to know more about your church, you can go to startingpoint.today. Give us your information. We'll reach back out to you this week. Or you can go right out in the lobby and you can meet some of our team out there. We'd love to connect with you out there and give you some more information. Next week, we're talking about addiction. So I wanted to let you know that. But addiction that applies to every single one of us. I think all of us would find ourselves kind of addicted to something that might be unhealthy at different variables and different levels. We're going to talk about that next week. So I would tell you this, come next week, but also bring someone with you next week. Most of us know somebody who needs to hear that talk, and we'd love for you to come back and join us next week. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you right back here for part 2 of Crave next Sunday. See you soon.
Hey, and thanks so much for joining us online. And hey, I wanted to get Patrick. Hey, thanks for your message today, Patrick. Really, I think it just hits all of us in different levels. But for that person who is like kind of struggling with,
I threw you off because I punched you, and all the viewers there are laughing at home.
I know, they're all laughing.
Sorry, you had a good question though.
You're stronger than you look. So.
No one would agree with that. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Use your question. Sorry.
No, but really, if you're struggling with approval,
right?
What are those next steps? You hinted at it, but what are those steps that you could take to really break past how that has control of your life?
One thing that I didn't say in the talk that I think is so important, and so this is kind of like special content for those who are online, but I think one of the best things you can do, and I know this sounds odd, but it's like to start and acknowledge that you deal with it. You know what I mean? Sometimes we don't, we might acknowledge that we struggle with approval, but we don't have a name to it. I think one of the best things you could ever do, somebody told me this a long time ago, is like you put a name to the person who you're looking for approval from, all of a sudden that kind of releases some of the hold that it has on you. And so I would say find somebody that you trust and then kind of talk to them about that. Some of you that needs to be a counselor, some of you need to go to counseling for that. Some of you have a best friend or sister or brother, somebody, and you just need to have that conversation, say, I struggle with approval from, and then you fill in the blank, and then talk about that. I think that's a big first step. But then I think, really kind of off of what Paul was teaching through the scriptures, I think one of the best things you can do is constantly remind yourself of who you are. And, I do that as much as I can throughout the week. I require that in my life a lot. Like, I need to be reminded of who I am and what I'm living from, just to kind of help kind of stay on track. But I think if you acknowledge it, and then if you figure out a way to keep it in front of you, again, note cards, some people, iPhone backgrounds, I don't know, there's a lot of ways to do that, but some of those would be, I think, helpful. So
cool.
Yeah, sorry I punched you.
Yeah,
you enjoyed that, didn't you?
You're not sorry.
Yeah, I'm kind of not really. Yeah, anyways, hey, thanks so much for watching. See ya.
Well, we do hope that you were not only challenged but encouraged by today's message, and we'd love for you to take part of a service in person. Hey, if you're in Traverse City or Metro Detroit, even in Orlando, Florida, we'd love to see you in person at one of our Kensington campuses. And be sure to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, where you can find out more about what's going on here at our campus locally and what we're doing around the world globally. So, all right, thanks again, and we'll see you soon.